So all this is leading to obviously NATO's summit in the next couple of weeks, end of June. I do want to ask another provocative question because, when you were saying your points, I wrote down here wartime footing, and it's this emphasis that European states need to be more on a wartime footing, at least preemptively. But at the same time, I'm going to quote them again, Putinists and whatever will argue that hang on a minute, you're saying that Russia can't even take Ukraine, so the likelihood that they're going to do anything in Europe is absurd, right? It's this sort of point they make. What do you say to that? Because it sounds kind of logical, right? But obviously, with your experience, it's not how that works.
So people that say, come on, Russia can't even defeat Ukraine, but yet you're worried they're going to somehow attack NATO. They're making the wrong assumption that a Russian attack against NATO would be just a larger version of what they're doing against Ukraine. And I don't think that's the case at all. First of all, Russia actually is at war with us already, not at the Article 5 sense, but what they are doing, these disruption operations in the Baltic Sea, for example, constant violations of airspace, disrupting freedom of navigation, use of illegal shadow fleet vessels to smuggle oil and gas out of the Baltic Sea and Black Sea to sell to China and India, the destruction of undersea infrastructure, all of these things. And also, there's been assassinations, sabotage against Western defense industry. All of these are disruption activities by the Russian Federation. But we have not figured out how to deal with that yet. I think Russia's objective in a war against NATO is not to take over all of NATO territory, but is to break the alliance, to continue to drive a wedge between Europe and the United States, which has been their goal since the end of the Second World War, but also to demonstrate that the alliance can't and won't respond to an attack on an ally. A much more limited incursion into Latvia, for example, or Estonia, and then they say, do you guys really want to get into a nuclear war over this little part of it, Latvia that is heavily Russian ethnic anyway? Do you really want to do that? And then, of course, yesterday, Russian spokesman talking about that they're not going to stop their war in Ukraine until the NATO is out of the Baltics. So they keep talking very clearly about the Baltics as an objective. So we should not assume that they're just going to finish in Ukraine and then 5 years later do it again against Baltic countries. What they're doing now and what I think they could try, they actually could do even while they are struggling in Ukraine because it's a different kind of attack. And it does appear that they have built up a significant force that is now in the Western Military District opposite Estonia and Latvia that has occurred without a lot of fanfare. I don't know how good they are, but it's not something you can just discount. And so this is why the Secretary General is trying to get people energized. This is why at the NATO summit at The Hague in 2 weeks, the alliance is going to agree, I believe, on a 5% requirement for spending, with 3.5% being for hard defense, actual capability, and 1.5 being in the more indirect type things, infrastructure, cybersecurity, etc. There is still not enough sense of urgency in nations, even though more and more people are talking about the Russians will be ready to attack in 2, 3, 5 years.
Okay. But is that realistic? 5% is,
Yes,
Britain's reached 3% before 2030, 2035. 5% is more than double the original.
political will. This is political will. And again, this is why, the sense of urgency to our population explaining why it matters.